As artists, we've all asked ourselves, what's the one thing I can make that truly fuels me? The thing that gives new inspiration, that makes me feel alive. For us, we realized it wasn't just about the work, it's about connection. That spark when you see yourself in someone else's struggle, someone else's rebellion. This podcast is our act of rebellion against the silence of creating alone. We hit record and said, just publish. At its core, Rebel Artists Through Time is about building a community of creators, past and present. We dive into the lives of history's rebels, artists, filmmakers, musicians, and writers, because their echoes are still with us. Their stories fuel ours. And as we tell them, we shine a light forward toward the new voices emerging today. It's our way of saying, you're not alone in the struggle. You're part of the lineage of legends. And if you've ever felt restless, misunderstood, or on fire with an idea you just couldn't put down, you're already one of us. This is Rebel Artists Through Time. Making some tea.
Decaf coffee.
Decaf?
Well, yeah, it's like...
yeah, I guess
almost
it is
8
like
o'clock.
7 o'clock over there.
Yeah, it's almost 8 o'clock, actually.
Oh, no. When we started, it was like, what, 7?
Yeah.
But I stupidly
All that
I didn't
material.
hit record, so this is our second crack at it, ladies and gentlemen.
Didn't hit record.
Someone didn't hit record.
We had a whole thing going on there. So how do we jump back into this?
Oh man. Well, we were before I had to interrupt and start us over again. The topic of this episode is someone who's very important to Sebastian, very formative to his musical career. I won't spoil it. I'll let him take it away.
Yeah, so the person that we're talking about today is Jerry Lee Lewis. So those of you who don't know, Jerry Lee Lewis he was one of the pioneers of rock and roll back from the 1950s. He was a contemporary of Elvis, but he was he's known as the first wild man of rock and roll. And he had long hair that he combed back, the sort of bleach blonde hair. And it looked kind of neat, but then he'd kick his piano stool away and his hair would come down and shaking it around. And we talked about it a bit before, but I think he's kind of where that headbanger metal kind of thing is from, because he was just really, really crazy on the stage. And that was how he got his fame. And yeah, like I said, at that time, I think he was the only guy who was really as popular as Elvis was, but he was one of these guys who was unbelievably crazy in both on stage and off stage. He had an incredibly wild personal life, and not one that I would like to emulate.
Well, yeah, he was a wild man indeed. A very fitting figure to talk about on our show, Rebel Artists Through Time, because he himself kind of indeed was a rebel.
I think Jerry Lee Lewis is the ultimate rebel. I think he's...
Yeah, of like the 50s rock and roll era. Like, yeah, he was adjacent to Elvis Presley at the time, who was much more popular, especially with the female audiences. But Jerry, as you were saying earlier in our previous attempt, was much more popular with the boys at the time.
Yeah,
He's like very much like a hard-edged rebel, especially for the guys. Because like the culture for the young men at the time was very like greasers.
Mm-hmm.
They would comb their hair back, wear leather jackets, have leather boots in their denim jeans and with pocket knives. Just more hard-edged culture that I guess Jerry spoke more to them.
Yeah, I think that one of the things is that Elvis was scandalous. Both of them were scandalous, but Elvis had a cute side to him. Like he was
more
scandalous,
more appropriate for the girls, much more of a gentleman.
He was more of a gentleman. Also, he was bad
in his own way.
He was bad, but the difference was that his way of being bad was scandalous, but also there was a funness to it, and there was a romantic thing to it. Jerry Lee Lewis, there was always something dangerous about him. I don't know how he does it, but his piano playing in the 50s sounds evil. It's like there's some way that he plays that is just there's something unhinged about it.
The devil's music, because it
That's what
was
they
certainly
thought at the
called that at the
time.
time by critics.
Yeah, there's an audio recording of him like debating this in the studio. He's like, "I've got the devil in me." Yeah. It's really,
Blasphemy.
yeah, yeah. Um, it was associated with the devil's music for a long time, and he was definitely not helpful for that image.
No, wasn't all the rock and rollers of the time, like Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Elvis, weren't they all just kind of blanket labeled by evangelicals as this is the devil worshippers, satanic music?
Yeah, the reason why they did that was because rock and roll was, well, the name rock and roll in itself is scandalous because to rock is to dance, but to roll is rolling in the hay, having sex. And so the term rock and roll was coined by this guy Alan Freed, but that was coined on air because he was talking on the radio. But before then, rock and roll was talked about, but it was, you're ready to rock and roll. It's kind of a very promiscuous thing. And what it did I mean, I think it's interesting to me that
It's like the
people,
rebellious music genre
it is
of modern era.
yeah. I mean, the only thing that came close to it was punk, right? But my
Or
problem,
hip hop was rebellious also in its way.
yes, it was. Yeah, it's true. But as far as that, like, dangerous, crazy, for me, it's the originator is rock and roll.
Yeah.
And what I love about it is it's fun. You can flip off the man and have fun at the same time. It's a cool thing. But he was one of the big leaders of that movement at that time, and I think very much a symbol of what rock and roll meant. This kind of liberation. There's
I like
this.
that word liberation. It was very liberating to kind
Well,
of
that
just let loose.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's why I think the girls went so crazy
Mm-hmm.
because they were coming out of a very uptight culture. And then suddenly there's these guys and girls on stage who are going crazy, and
Their
it's like they're
button
talking about,
shirts are halfway done up. Their hair's greasy and wet and hanging with, bad boy bangs.
yeah, and they're shaking their
Swaying
hips
their hips
around.
in a very way that wasn't suitable for television.
Yeah, and Jerry Lee Lewis was he was touring with these guys in '56, and it was by that time because Elvis was part of Sun Records. Sun Records was where Elvis, Roy Orbison, Carl Perkins, Johnny Cash, all these guys were, and Jerry Lee Lewis. And so when Jerry Lee Lewis was kind of discovered, he he was doing his own records, but he was also working because it was a very small record label. He was also playing piano for other people's records. So if you listen to some Carl Perkins songs, there's a song called Your True Love by Carl Perkins. And if you listen to that song, it's Jerry Lee Lewis playing the piano in the background. And anyway, they would do these tours, and the first tour was actually in Canada. I'm trying to remember where it was. It was one of the first place they went to. But anyway, on this tour, they're all guitar players, right? Except for Jerry. And Jerry was jealous of the other guys because they could move around on stage. And I think it was Carl Perkins.
He's so tied down and chained to the piano. Oh,
Yeah, he's chained to the
although
piano.
I guess he
And
found a way to to break that.
well, so Carl Perkins, he was like, "I'm jealous of you guys. You can jump around with the guitar and stuff." And Carl Perkins said, "Well, can you play standing up, Jerry?" And Jerry Lee Lewis was like, "I can play lying down." And they were like,
play upside down.
yeah. And they were like, "Well, why don't you try getting up?" So in the middle of the performance, he gets up, but he couldn't get the stool. The stool got like caught in his boot, so he kicked the stool back, and the stool went flying backwards, and his hair came down, and everyone went so crazy. And it was like Johnny Cash and Carl Perkins backstage were like, "I think we told him the wrong thing." And so then that became his signature after that.
And it was then that headbanging was born. In our last attempt at this, you said that you're a firm believer that Jerry Lee Lewis is kind of like the originator of that sort of hard rock metal music, stage antic stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's anyone else who comes close, to be honest. Because I mean, Little Richard used to play standing up, but like Little Richard wasn't that wild in comparison. I mean, Jerry Lee Lewis used to break stuff and like kick the piano stool away and get up on top of his piano. He was just nuts,
Set shit on fire.
yeah, set stuff on
Can you
fire.
tell us that
And
story again?
yeah. So the story is that that guy Alan Freed, who coined the term rock and roll, he used to put on these big shows, and so there was kind of unheard of now, but he used to get the headliners of the time: Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Elvis Presley, Roy Orbison. He'd get them all in one show in New York. So they had, so it was Jerry Lee Lewis, Chuck Berry, and there were a few others who were in this big show, in this big lineup. And at the time, it was 1957, 58. I think it must have been 57. Jerry Lee Lewis had a hit with Whole Lotta Shakin' going on, but Chuck Berry had already had a lot of hits prior to this. And so he was already kind of established star. And he wanted to close the show. It was in his contract to close the show, but Jerry Lee Lewis wanted to close the show. And so the story goes that Jerry Lee Lewis lost out and had to play before Chuck Berry. And so he got his guys to go down to the store and fill a Coke bottle with lighter fluid. So then at the end of his show, he kicks his piano stool away. He's playing rock and pulls out the bottle, douses the piano and sets the piano on fire, and then walks off stage and says, "Follow that fucker." To
just like puts his hand on his shoulder and quietly whispers.
Yeah, that's the story.
And did Chuck Berry close the show?
Well, the story goes that Chuck Berry didn't go on after that, but there's reason to believe that this story is exaggerated. As I said, there's two stories like that, and there's one that he played on stage at a harbor somewhere, and the piano was bad, so he pushed the piano off the stage and then pushed it across past the audience and off into the water that was there, into the ocean, and that had eyewitnesses, so that actually happened. But I'd like to think the piano fire thing happened, but it is maybe a romanticized story, but it's far from
romanticized that the audience was so crazed in excitement that they began tearing the seats out from the floor of the theater.
I don't think that is romanticized, actually. I think that actually happened. They at least used to, tear things up.
Make room to dance around. They didn't want
to
sit down anymore.
They couldn't sit down
anymore. Shake it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's true. They'd just go completely nuts.
Jerry had that effect.
He did have that effect, and a lot of the other guys had that. Yeah, there's a picture of him shirtless with some police officers after a show. He's like had his shirt torn off by women. It's pretty crazy. Yeah, those guys it was like before Beatlemania, there was the mania for these guys. That was just really, really nuts. Yeah, because this is one of my favorite things is that during the Second World War, the Nazis got hooked on amphetamines. Amphetamines were really, really big, especially close to the end of the war. So the Nazis were just they were like shipping amphetamines off to the troops. The Nazis had a real problem with them, and they were using them to get people, because amphetamines are like, it gets you wired, right? So they're sending it to the front lines to get people to keep fighting and not,
keep on being barbarous psychopaths.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's what the amphetamine, and the Nazis got really hooked on them. Anyway, and there was, it was going around after the war. They didn't know what to do with them. They ended up selling them.
We talk about art on this podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Now we're talking about drugged up Nazis.
This is really important. This is something that not a lot of people know. The amphetamines that became popular during the war, that were used by the Nazis and probably on the other side, they were all like, they still had this supply, and so they were all sold to the rock and roll musicians. After the war, that was when, because before then, like, music wasn't that crazy, It's like maybe the 20s they had they had like New Orleans jazz and the Charleston and stuff, but rock and roll, these guys, this is like the touring age, where they're like place to place to place, show after show. And so the amphetamines that were used in the war all got bought by the musicians. And so the rock and roll musicians started using these amphetamines. This is like post World War II. Supply of amphetamines are going into like the rock and roll business, because the musicians need to be drugged up to their eyeballs to get out of bed in order to actually keep playing. And it would have the effect, like Jerry Lee Lewis one time went to a honky tonk and basically sat down at the piano, took some pills, and played for 8 or 9 hours straight. So these guys, yeah, they were completely, it was a wild time. Yeah.
Very model citizens.
Very model citizens.
Well,
Yeah.
I'd like to segue because people who don't know my friend Sebastian, Jerry Lee Lewis is a very important figure to him. I've said the word formative earlier, and it's very fitting because Sebastian discovered, well, I'll let him tell this story, but Sebastian discovered Jerry Lee Lewis at the ripe age in high school, and it really set him on a path to become a rock and roll musician. But anyway, I'll let him take it away.
Yeah, I discovered, I actually started out the first time that I started singing was as a kind of an Elvis impersonator. And I was really, really into Elvis. And I found Elvis because my parents had a CD drawer. And there was an Elvis sort of CD in there, and I listened to it. And from that moment on, I never listened to anything. I don't listen to a lot of modern music. And this was the first introduction to older music that I had. And so Elvis was really influential. But then in high school, I had a band, and I had a piano player for the band, and the piano player ditched me. And when I was younger, I'd played piano, but I hadn't played in about 9 or 10 years. When I was a kid, I played. And by this point, I guess I was 15, 16. And so I decided I'd start playing the piano again. So I started to look up, rock and roll piano, and I came across Jerry Lee Lewis doing a whole lot of shaking going on. I think it must have been the Alan Freed show in 1957. And something just clicked for me. It was like, this guy was what I wanted to be. He awoke something. And I've realized since then that it's kind of, I didn't want to impersonate him. That was in me, that kind of rock and roll thing was in me. And I just saw, it was like seeing, at the time it was like seeing myself. It was quite strange. And so I loved his energy and just how he was so obviously was just uncontrollable by anybody.
He's almost like primal, animalistic on stage.
Yeah,
like
he
jump
was.
around, kick the stool, set things on fire, but also turn on the crowd with his erotic finger movements.
Yeah. He's wiggle it around just a little bit. Yeah.
Even to this day, he's still so entertaining.
Yeah, still, see, you can still watch it, and he was fantastic. But he was like an animal. Yeah,
very much a rebel artist of his time.
Really, really rebel. Yeah, he was a rough guy, that's for sure. And this is before I knew about any of that. I was really first just introduced to his music, and that was it really for a long time. And he was really the first real part of my musical education, actually, as a performer. And what I wanted to do with him, because there's a lot of Jerry Lee Lewis impersonators. I didn't want to impersonate him. What I wanted to do was I wanted to get his energy, which I believe that it's just a energy that you can tap into. But, if you listen to his album Live at the Star Club, or my favorite is The Greatest Live Show on Earth. And the energy is just insane. And it just ramps up and ramps up and ramps up, and then he's like, it's just crazy. And everyone's going nuts, because he had this like...
Yeah. Some of those old video recordings you used to show me, you could hardly even hear the music because of the amount of screaming.
Yeah. Yeah, he was cool. But yeah, so he was my first really big influence. And so I listened to him night and day for a long time. And I learned there's these different eras of his career. And for me, there's this period of time where because he married his 13-year-old cousin. And
this is where we start to get into a bit of the not so great stuff about Jerry.
Yeah.
But Sebastian and I were saying earlier in our last attempt at this recording, we're both of the opinion that we can separate the art from the artist.
Yeah.
I think it's important to do that because I can't tarnish a legacy when the body of work is so influential on culture and also, clearly yourself as a person. But when you hear about some of these stories, you kind of just have to like separate the art from the artist and just kind of maintain that image.
Yeah, that's always been an interesting debate for me. But to me now, it's pretty obvious that, I think someone's body of work stands for itself, and it's It's also not clear to me that in order to really create, or in order to really perform genuinely, you have to access another part of yourself. And it's almost like a different person. And it's kind of like, I really like that thing David Lynch said, that he said, I don't think that Vincent van Gogh was depressed when he painted. And it's kind of this, I like this idea that the person who you are on a day-to-day basis and the person you are as an artist are kind of different people. And in the case of Jerry Lee Lewis, I think I can't believe a lot of the things that he did in his life. I've always found it hard to associate that with the version of him that I see on stage. But I guess that's the case with all kind of artists. Yeah, he married his 13-year-old cousin, and he went over to England in the 1958, I think it was, and the British press got a hold of him, and the British press
They tore him
or
apart.
something else. They tore him apart, and because of that, he came back to America, and
It followed him.
it followed him, yeah.
But like,
And
I guess they didn't catch on to it like the first time because I think you were saying that Louisiana, the state where he's from, it wasn't that frowned upon yet between cousins or relatives or minors.
yeah, and they didn't. It's interesting because their problem when he came back from England wasn't what he'd done. It was the embarrassment he had caused, you know? And so it wasn't that suddenly it wasn't okay. It was that he had caused this embarrassment while he was over there, that he just couldn't be touched.
Or tamed or controlled or censored.
Right. Yeah. So then he spends the next 10 years trying to get back on top again, which is insane. And eventually, by the end of the 1960s, he comes out on top as a country artist. He never reached number one again, but he was a really popular country artist for a few years, really good at it.
Why do you think he changed the country? Was it much more reflective, melancholic music?
Well, it wasn't actually his idea. So they were trying to, because he was straight rock and roll, but basically because of his history, the record labels didn't want to have anything to do with him, and the radio didn't want to play his music, and the Beatles became a big thing. So he was kind of, shoved under because of that. And they tried, it's great. I love this stuff because it's so kind of weird, but he brought out all these albums in the 60s where basically they were trying to figure out what the hell to do with him. And they even try to do like a bit of soul music with him. And
really?
It's like, yeah. And they don't know what to do with him because he's really talented. So by the end of the 60s, there's a guy who writes a song called Another Place, Another Time. And it was a country song. And they convinced him to record it and play it. And he just did straight country. And they didn't realize he was so good at country music. And so it was a hit. And he did this album called Another Place, Another Time. And the big hit from that album was there was a guy who was commissioned to write the song. And it was the day before he had to hand the song in, and he still hadn't written anything because he was suffering from writer's block.
Oh, no.
And he was like, shit, what am I going to do? And he picked up the newspaper, and the headline to the newspaper was "What's Made Milwaukee Famous," which was talking about beer, right? And he was like, that's it. And he wrote the song.
Eureka!
The day before. So he wrote the song called "What's Made Milwaukee Famous," which was the big hit on that album. And that was Jerry Lee Lewis's comeback hit as a country artist. And so he did all these country ballads and stuff, and it's amazing. And it just suddenly like launches off on a country career. By the mid-70s, all those guys were kind of more legendary again.
I wonder if they caught on to the naming of the song, and the editor was more like, hey, didn't he steal our headline from that one edition?
Yeah, they might have done.
Where are my royalties? I want my pie of the Jerry Lee estate.
I wonder how many other songs have been taken from headlines. As far as him being a rebel, I think there's a couple of stories that need to be told about him, about his life. One of them is that in 1976, is a year before Elvis died, he was drunk at a bar, and he thought that I don't trust that Elvis actually called. It doesn't really make any sense. But basically, Jerry Lee Lewis thought that Elvis called him from at the bar because Elvis supposedly would know where Jerry Lee Lewis was in the bar in Memphis, saying he was depressed and wanted to talk to him because they were old like colleagues. And Jerry Lee Lewis was like, "Hold on, I'm going to come up there and I'm going to we're going to have a good time and we'll make you feel better. He was drunk, so I'm pretty sure that phone call didn't happen. But what did happen was that Jerry Lee with his with his drummer, get in the car. Jerry Lee's wasted, and he had the gun which had been given to him on the dashboard. They get up to the gates of Graceland, and the guy, security guy, is like, "You got a gun there, Jerry. You coming in to kill Elvis?" And Jerry Lee Lewis was like, "If you're stupid enough to believe that, I guess I am." And and then, like, "Well, we can't let you in." And Jerry Lee's, "Well, we're old friends, and I want to go in there and say hi." I said, "Well, we can't do it." So he's like, "Okay, I'll be back." So he puts it in reverse, drives the car back, puts it into gear, and drives straight up, and he smashes through the gates of Graceland.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and the police show up and
Part of the
arrest him.
story true?
Yeah, that part's true. That's true because he was arrested for it. And there's his mug shot can be found there. And one of the other things, have you ever heard of the Grand Ole Opry?
No.
The Grand Ole Opry is a it's the country music venue in Nashville. And it's like country music, especially at that time, is more kind of like Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings and all those guys were doing outlaw country, but that was in Austin.
Hank Williams.
And Hank Williams is dead by this point.
Oh.
Hank Williams died. Hank Williams Jr. though, but Hank Williams Jr. was
Junior. That's who I was thinking of. Yeah.
he was also more. I think he's more rebel, kind of more outlaw country. But the Grand Ole Opry is more family friendly.
Mm-hmm.
And Jerry Lee Lewis always wanted to play the Grand Ole Opry, but they wouldn't let him because he was too unpredictable, right? And eventually, finally, they managed to get him to agree. He finally convinces them, and they're like, "Okay, but no rock and roll, right? And no foul language."
Good luck.
Yeah, so Jerry Lee plays at the Grand Ole Opry, and he plays some beautiful country stuff and everything else. And then for the last song, he says, "And by the way, my name is Jerry Lee Lewis, and I'm a rock and roll motherfucker."
Oh.
And he kicks his piano stool away and starts playing rock and roll. But
Would have
yeah,
been
so
amazing to be in that room.
So that's mixed with numerous fights, driving cross country with a flat tire until their car set on fire to get to a gig. Also setting fire to a tape rack in a gas station because the tapes were bootlegged. This guy was just out of control all the time, and he was survived somehow until I think he was 88, I think.
Yeah, didn't he die? I think you told me he died in 2022. Like very
Yeah. He outlived
long
everybody. I have no idea how. He outlived everyone.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty crazy. But his influence is undeniable as a rock and roll musician, and definitely as a rebel. For me, he's the ultimate rebel.
Wait, if you don't mind, I'd like to segue and ask you a bit about his foundations, his early life. He said he grew up in Louisiana, and he grew up like quite poor, actually.
Yeah, he grew up dirt poor. Yeah. So it's Faraday, Louisiana. He was born in 1935, and yeah, he was born to deep poverty. He had a brother who was, I think, run over by a car when they were pretty young, very young, so toddlers, and so that had a big effect on him growing up. And when he was a kid, they took him. His parents took him to a neighbor's house, and they had a piano. And he walked over and started picking out a tune on the piano. And so his dad recognized that he was natural at the piano, and so his parents actually mortgaged their farm in order to buy him his first piano.
They mortgaged the farm.
Yeah. So he had
They must have had a lot of faith in their kid.
Yeah, they had a lot of faith in their kid. Yeah, and as we said before, if anyone knows who Jimmy Lee Swaggart was, he was a televangelist he was quite big in the 70s, and he was really famous kind of evangelical guy. But anyway, he was Jerry Lee Lewis's cousin, and they were basically the same age. And so they used to sneak out to what they call the Chocolate Quarter, which was across the tracks where all the black people lived. And they had the blues clubs and stuff. Well, probably, I was Faraday, Louisiana. I'm pretty sure they only had one club. But they used to sneak in there. And at that time, there was a young B.B. King came through there who was just touring the clubs at that time. Yeah, B.B., yeah. So that was kind of We're talking really early 50s, but like late 40s as well. They're sneaking in there. And by the time he's old enough to get in there, he starts playing drums for people. And so his early musical influences is all these guys who will be really famous who are passing through this club.
The blues era, yeah.
So he has these influences. So he has on one side, he's got people like Hank Williams, and on the other side, he's got people like B.B. King. This is kind of like, what those guys did was they took blues and country and they combined them, and you get rock and roll. When you combine blues and country together, you get rock and roll. Mm-hmm. And then you can go either way. But rock and roll is the middle, and if you're more towards blues, it's blues rock, right? And if you're more towards country, it's rockabilly.
It's a spectrum.
So yeah. It's a spectrum, but rock and roll is this. You've got the blues chords with the country speed, and yeah, so it's very, and also the voices are a little, kind of higher rather than the blues. But yeah, it's that time budding rock and roll, and none of those guys knew really what they were doing.
Would you say Jerry kind of on that spectrum was populated both sides and the center? Or was he very much just rock and roll mostly, and then later on, like you said, did more country?
Well, he started out doing rockabilly. A lot of those guys, like Elvis, started out doing rockabilly as well. Mm-hmm. So he was more rockabilly and then rock and roll, and then later on did pure country. I'm pretty interested about, where the line is between country and rock and roll, because it's not entirely clear. You can listen to some outlaw country that even comes out now and it's very rock-like, but it's that time where these kind of genres are being bent together to create something new. And out of it springs this really wild energy, which is in rock and roll. So for me, it's personified in Jerry Lee Lewis. But he's like he's like an animal. He's just like coming out of the gates of hell. And it's like he's like a monster.
Yeah,
plows out there.
That kind of resonated with a lot of like young people, especially teenagers at the time, that really wanted to rebel and not be like their parents. And I think you put it before, in a very uptight society.
Yeah. They were very uptight and very proper, and it's interesting because the 1950s rock and roll movement was kind of the first time that white kids started listening to black musicians. Mm-hmm. And this is like before the civil rights movement, obviously, that happens in the 60s.
They listened to it like, gee, this stuff's actually really good.
Right. And it's kind of crazy because people like Fats Domino, and I mean, at that time, you had not only the rock and rollers, but also the jazz guys like Nat King Cole, who would be playing in like a hotel or something, or in a show, and then after the show they were treated like garbage, but during the show they're like, oh wow, it's great musicians. It was really strange. And at that time you had Chuck Berry and Little Richard and, like I said, Fats Domino, and all these black artists who are coming out, and white kids are listening to this stuff like Chuck Berry, and that to the older generation was pretty bad. And so that was a lot to do with, this is the devil's music. But then there were people like Jerry Lee Lewis and Elvis who were alongside them during this time. And yeah, I mean, that time is just wild, I think. It was like an explosion of something. And it's sort of, then there's a bit of a dip in the middle before the Beatles come back. And the Beatles it's interesting that actually
during the 60s?
Yeah, because all those guys were uncontrollable. And in the span of a couple of years, Jerry Lee had his marriage scandal. Chuck Berry was caught taking a underage girl across the border somewhere, and he was arrested. Elvis joined the army, and Little Richard stopped performing and started preaching. And then
in 2 years, America loses like their 4 like giants of rock and roll.
Yeah, and they get replaced by the Bobbies.
All the Bobbies.
Yeah. They're all called Bobby. There's actually a
Bobby Darin.
Yeah. There's a great Jerry Lee Lewis interview where he talks about that. He's like, suddenly everyone was Bobby. And
who are the other Bobbies? I know you said Bobby Darin. Who else?
Okay, so Bobby Darin was actually really good. So Bobby Darin is separate from the Bobbies. He did Beyond the Sea and
right.
But the Bobbies I'm talking about are Bobby V, Bobby Vinton, and there's a bunch of them. There's another one who's really nauseating, but I can't remember. Maybe it's
The
a
record
good
companies
idea.
were like, "Oh, thank God, we finally are done with those wild rock men. Now we can finally take their music, button it up all nice, and put it on television."
Yeah, right. And they weren't about the same things. They were really like clean lyrics and just it. And then so the Beatles basically gave back that music to the Americans. That was
Yeah, the
like
British invasion.
yeah, the British invasion was actually like a handing back this music that they loved, and it's really interesting.
Reclaiming our rebellious art.
But in public, Jerry Lee said the Beatles were great, but in private, he said they should take a short walk back across the Atlantic.
Short walk.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, he's the original wild man of rock and roll. He is not a role model to look up to in your life, but I have an immense respect for him as a showman and as a musician. He was absolutely fantastic. And as somebody who was self-taught at the piano, he was amazing.
People, please watch some of these videos of him playing. He's a wizard.
He's fantastic, but especially stuff from the 60s. If anyone wants to look up his performance from the Ed Sullivan Show in 1969, which is my favorite. That's my favorite period of time for Jerry Lee Lewis because he's got the wildness, but he's also really confident. And yeah, I'd encourage anybody to go and check him out for themselves. He's a fabulous find, I think.
Would you ever? I think I already asked you if you ever wanted to meet him someday.
Yeah, I used to want to meet him. I used to want to meet him. Something kind of happens with him in the 70s. If I was to meet him, I would have loved to have met him in the 60s. Oh, I met a guy at a gig when I was living in Canada still. And I was so jealous of this guy because I did this show and this guy came up to me and he said, "Hey, you remind me of Jerry Lee Lewis."
Oh,
And I was,
a great compliment. You were
yeah,
probably
it's a
like,
great.
you
I
probably
was
like
really
skipped
happy,
a beat
yeah.
inside.
And I was like, yeah, I love Jerry Lee Lewis. And the guy was like, I saw him in 1966. And I was like, what? And he was like, yeah. So the guy says, he's like, yeah, I was in Guelph
Right.
in
Wow.
he said in 1966, and he said Jerry Lee was playing in a hockey stadium, right? And he said my mom got me the tickets because my mom was a fan. And then afterwards, there was a rumor going around that Jerry Lee was going to come to a little bar downtown and just play in this bar. And so he said my mom snuck me into the bar because I was underage. And sure enough, Jerry Lee showed up to this little bar and kept the show going in the bar.
That's great.
And I was like, I wish you hadn't told me that, you fucker. I was really jealous of that. But something changes in the 70s and like we mentioned before, the 70s were like, that was the drug time, really, because the 60s was quite harmless with the psychedelics and the weed.
And the hippies.
And the hippies, yeah. But the 70s was heroin and cocaine. Like the drug scene and the entertainment scene was insane at that time. And a lot of people, if they didn't die, they were severely damaged.
And their morale, everyone's morale was low.
Yeah, the 70s is a weird time.
Mm-hmm.
Great for music, though.
Yeah.
The 70s is amazing for music. But there was a lot of really hard drugging.
Great for movies, too.
But yeah, I'm pretty happy I didn't meet him. I think it's easier for me to separate the man from the art without having met him. But I owe him a debt of gratitude for my own career, really. I mean, I was just, my voice is a bit hoarse and I'm a bit tired today because I just did 3 shows here in Paris, doing rock and roll, like, Jerry Lee style. And
did you play Great Balls of Fire?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Do you play those 2 at every show?
Yeah. Yeah, it's really fun. Yeah, I don't do all of this stuff, but I do those ones. And
does it get a good crowd reaction every time?
Yeah, it does. Not like young people. Is it really crazy? But I wouldn't be doing that if it wasn't for him.
Mm-hmm.
And it's great. And it's cool now because I get to do that. And a lot of the young people who come in don't know who Jerry Lewis is. And so it's kind of it's a whole, like I said, I don't impersonate him, but I got his energy is what I was after. So I do some of his kind of stuff that's fun, but I don't dye my hair blonde or anything like that.
But you do some
but
of that head banging stuff.
oh yeah, kick the piano stool and
Beads
everything.
of sweat dropping over the piano keys.
I had blood on the piano the last time I was there.
Oh man.
Yeah. But yeah, so
You gotta bleed for your art, otherwise it's not real.
Absolutely, man. This rock and roll. Yeah, I've got at least a part of me that's a bit of a rock and roller, and that rock and roller side wouldn't be as happy as it is if it wasn't for Jerry Lee. And so I owe Jerry Lee Lewis a debt of gratitude, really. And he is, he's the ultimate rebel, and
very appropriate for our podcast.
yeah, in some ways the other end of the spectrum to our previous topic. So we talked about Tolkien last time, right?
Yeah.
And I think this is a good kind of span for this show of the types of rebels that we'll talk about.
Yeah, Tolkien wasn't much of a rebel, was he? Jerry Lee, though. Jerry Lee fits the title of rebel for sure. I think we picked a good one.
Well, Tolkien was a rebel in some ways, but he's much more of an innovator, whereas Jerry Lee is, he's the innovator from hell.
Follow that up, killer. All right, folks. Well, I think that's a good place to end it there. Thanks, Sebastian. Thanks for coming in. He's like, people can't see it through the recording, but I've seen the sun go down.
Yeah.
All right, buddy. Well, I'll catch you next time for our next episode.
Yeah, with pleasure, Dawson.
Take care.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
You've been listening to Rebel Artists Through Time. We created this podcast as our own act of rebellion against perfection, against silence, and to remind each other that we're part of something bigger. If something here sparked an idea for you, take it forward, share it, create from it, because that's what this is all about. Connection across time through art. We're so glad you joined us, and until next time, keep creating.